we have this idea that it's going in to create this lovely, beautiful working home dynamic. And the dynamics in that home are safe and everyone's happy. And you can see this ad here from Samsung actually about their smart fridge. And it's really glorifying this idea that it's going into this happy home where there's going to be no harm from anyone. And I believe this creates then issues with how we consider people operating in that space and the individuals in that space and how they're going to interact with each other. So by recognizing that violence is occurring in these spaces where we're putting a lot of our connected devices, we're going to start changing how we think about sharing of data between different users, between different devices in that network, and recognizing that we can't just place something in a home and say, you know, whoever has administrative access to this, they're going to be in charge and they're going to make sure that everyone on that network is kept safe. Those sorts of responsibilities can't be left to the users, particularly when we know that perpetrators of inter-partner violence tend to be the ones who are setting up and have those administrative account accesses for the devices. Another thing to consider that changes this from our traditional threat modeling idea, as I said, of that external threat actor trying to break into the secured network, is the idea that our intimate partner threat actor operates in a very, very different way. So when we think about threat modeling, we often consider those attacks in terms of penetration testing, exploits that impede the security and standard operation of the IoT, which is essentially us saying what could go wrong with the technology. But as I said, with intimate partner violence, it's essential that we consider the perpetrator as predominantly being UI-bound adversaries, because they really don't have the technical skills. We don't see them having those technical skills that we would expect to see when we think about an attack against our IoT network and services. So you can see the quote there from Ian. It's really clear that perpetrators are using these rudimentary, crude forms of tech abuse. They're not conducting those sort of exploits using Metasploit. They're not hacking into home routers. They're not doing any of this sophisticated sort of stuff. They're just using the UI-bound interfaces as they're designed to be to leverage all of that connectivity and all those lovely features that we have for convenience, which are in a safe and happy home environment. Great. And that's what we're aiming for in those environments. When it's not that environment, they're really easily exploited and really easily used for harm. So we need to be starting to consider that they're operating in a different way and they are creating these different elements. So how we start doing that, Evelyn provided a really good indication of this. So during that threat modeling, it's really thinking about what are the mundane, simple things that can be done to the devices. It's not necessarily looking at the really sophisticated attacks. Perpetrators are using IoT in a really creepy, simple way, but that's really not being acknowledged. So this is the important aspect, that it really is that simplicity that's creating a lot of issues. So that's when it starts getting into problems with our design, and we need to start thinking about how we're designing it, and that threat modeling process is going to come through by us recognizing this is a risk, this is a threat, we need to change how we're doing this and creating this technology. So some key things to consider with our intimate partner threat actor being a very different style of attacker is that they often have physical access to the devices. They've got knowledge of victim survivors' passwords. They've got, as I said before, administrative account privileges. And this is all, whether that's occurring voluntarily, victim survivors sharing these things, incidentally, they're in the same home, they've set them up and then potentially they've separated and they still have access, or it can be coerced as well. This can be part of the abuse cycle, that they're demanding access to these sorts of services and devices. So when we consider that, the intimate partner violence threat actor is really operating in a different way. We can't just then rely on this idea of authentication models of cybersecurity to ensure that we've got our privacy and security and our safety all round up. Relying on those just passwords and authorized user access models, it really isn't sufficient when we know that our intimate partner perpetrators are bypassing that. They already have access to all of these things. And it's not sufficient to say, well, the victim survivor simply needs to make sure that they keep those passwords to themselves. That's not going to work in this dynamic relationship where abuse is coming through. And as I said, all of these sorts of information and access can be coerced and can be part of the abuse cycle. So we need to be going above and beyond this. We really need to start thinking about what can go wrong as the technology is used as intended, and then how can we counteract some of those issues in terms of how we're implementing our data collection processes, our storage, retrieval, factors and our remote access and connectivity issues. How is all of that network and the dynamics of our IoT potentially going to be misused to abuse someone in an intimate partner relationship, and what can we do to overcome that? And it's not an easy thing to do. It is very complex and very difficult, and I'm very aware of that, but it is a conversation that we need to start having, and is something that we need to start considering in our cybersecurity realm and in our threat modeling processes. So moving on to some of those challenges, acknowledging that this is not an easy task to do. One of the limitations is obviously going to be resources and capacity. So what we see when we have this focus so much on technical elements, going outside of that and exploring this idea of intimate partner violence as a different element and a new concept that is often above and beyond what our traditional threat modeling processes are doing. Our engineers and that sort of thing usually aren't used to looking at this sort of stuff. It creates this really difficult space for them to operate in. So it really needs to be focusing on how we can actually get over these constraints. And there's a lovely little quote there by Robert talking about it being a headspace and a time thing, and it being resources. And also, he notes here, getting access to people who are going to inform you about this, right? So we're talking about intimate partner violence. That means we often need to have some sort of input and insight from those users and those people being exposed to this sort of abuse. So then when we add on this complexity then of interacting with those vulnerable populations, you can see Anne's got a quote here. It's really tricky because you want to design with survivors. You want to be taking their considerations into their positions and their experience in consideration, but you also can't demand people share their worst traumas. As she says here, like, do you really think that's a fair expectation? Are you going to set up your workplace to actually make it a safe place to do that? Probably not. So this is where we really start recognizing that when we want to start addressing these issues, and we need to start bringing in our victim survivor experiences and perspectives into this conversation, dealing with those populations can be very tricky. It has to be done with a lot of trauma-informed practices and sensitivity. And I wouldn't actually recommend that cybersecurity, threat modeling people just go out on their own and start trying to talk and gather victim survivors. I would recommend that this is going through some intermediary figures, reaching out to some potentially victim survivor support services. There is WESNet in Australia, for example, and some other, there's the Centre for Inclusive Design. Organizations like this, they offer this space for people in tech, people who want to do this threat modeling work and want to be able to provide safety and security and privacy for all of the users, provides that intermediary space for them to go and actually get access and talk with people who are experiencing these things in a safe space. So instead of trying to transform all of our startup organizations and all these sorts of things working in this IoT space into trauma-informed, safe areas, I would recommend going and dealing with one of those organizations that's already doing that work, already interacting with those populations in that safe area. So this is one of the key kind of challenges that I want to acknowledge, as it is a substantial one. It's all well and good me saying, go do this, but they're not really talking about any of the difficulties. And I want to end on the last difficulty that's really associated with this, and what it all kind of comes back to at this stage is just this lack of awareness. So realistically, even just me coming in today and talking about this problem is helping, because what we tend to see is that none of this is intentional. Technologists aren't out here saying, oh, we don't care about that problem, it's not something we're worried about. It's just that a lot of the time, this has never occurred to anyone to even think about the fact that IoT can be used against an intimate partner to cause harm and abuse. So as Kenneth says here, the conversation just needs to be way higher. We need a greater velocity conversation around all of those safety and harm issues. It's vital, but it's not happening. So that's what I would recommend. If you've seen this presentation, take this knowledge that it's happening and share that and raise some of this awareness with others. It's really critical and vital that we're getting this information out there so that we can start working on it. And I've just listed up here some further recommendations for extra resources to go and look at this sort of stuff. So I know that I don't give a huge amount of information about how to actually go and do it. And I talk about a lot of the issues with how to do it. These papers here are a good starting point. A lot of this stuff obviously links very strongly into safety by design. So when we're doing our threat modeling and recognizing a threat and an issue, going back and saying, well, how can we design this safely so it doesn't have that potential to be misused and abused by our intimate partner perpetrators? And these resources here are a really good starting point for that jumping off point. I've got one myself that was published earlier this year, and then a co-author of mine, Leonie Tanza, has got a really good particular book chapter, particularly focused on cybersecurity challenges and threat modeling. The e-safety commissioner here in Australia has a lot of stuff, really good resources on safety by design and how to do this process of thinking about, is this safe? Okay, yes, it has privacy, yes, it has security, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. How do I ensure that it's safe for users who are potentially experiencing abuse? Eva Penzimu also has an excellent book available called Design for Safety, where she actually has a lot of information about how to do these processes and go through and consider what are those potential threats and how do we actually mitigate some of those processes once we've got our what if this could happen aspect that we normally do in our early threat modeling process to consider what we need to start addressing and thinking about and mitigating. So that's all from me today. Thank you everyone for listening. And as I said, I really hope that the word gets out about the potential for this to be a problem and the abusability of IoT really needing to be addressed and considered in terms of that larger conversation about safety as opposed to just our privacy, security, technical vulnerability issues.
Thank you, Andy. Well done. We do see when we look back into the history of internet, this is always a concern between the advancing new technologies and how we balance the security and safety issues. So this is definitely an ongoing discussion that that will continue, and it will happen again when other new technology now like the AI or ChatGPT are creating. But it's very it's good to see that they start to connect here we are doing this to really work with some tech person to let them know, well, wait, when you're creating these kind of things, maybe we should think in advance rather than creating something that we can't control in the future. So that's where we will see the need not only for co-production of security, but also the cross-disciplinary research collaborations to advance while we are advancing the technology. And here we I'm just trying to link your research to our next speaker. We do see technologies are creating a lot of issues that we can't really foresee, or even for us, we are using these technologies might not know that we are actually falling into the victimization. So next one we have Dr. Shuvik Mukherjee.